I am live. I am reading out of Return to Elysium. It is a life of Joan Grant in 2nd century BC. She has returned to Elysium now, and I unfortunately interrupted this chapter of part 3 entitled The Garden. It is chapter, what is it? I think it's 5. No, it's 6, I think. Sorry, I should have looked this up. It's chapter 6, and I'm continuing where I had stopped. Was Narcissus a cynic or a passionate idealist? I think he expected so much that he lost everything, even himself. You might have saved him, Lucina, but you were too ignorant. Or was it easier to accept him as an instructor in certain female arts, which your pride would never permit you to use? I was not entirely ineffective as a woman. You didn't make much of a success with Nigellus. Poor Nigellus. It meant so much to him when you bothered to put perfume between your breasts or whispered delicious nonsense in his ear. You might have made it a compact and ductile haven of your bed, instead of turning it into a dusty anteroom of the Senate, in which he discovered he wore wilting laurels. You consistently made a fool of your husband, and only the fool knows the bitterness of the fool's tears. Nigellus was extremely intelligent. Not in his choice of women. First Julia, and then you. He grinned. You're much better at taking insults than you used to be. You didn't even wonder whether I deserved a few boils, or whether it would be more amusing if I fell down the steps. I think Euripides might have kept quiet about the boils. They were most uncomfortable when they came home to roost, I said with feeling. By the way, Lucina, when you have settled down here, you might see that you can do with the family. I could see the ostrich feather fans waving slowly backwards and forwards in the distance. You mean her? Any of them. They are trying desperately hard to pretend they are happy, and we can't let people be miserable in Elysium. I've done what I can, given them things and provided servants, but it hasn't done much good. Isn't it time you stopped pretending you have forgotten everything you learned from Salonius? I don't want to get involved with other people's troubles. It sounds horribly selfish, but it's true. He took me by the shoulders. Lucina, you haven't been really happy for years, for longer than you realize. You never will be happy until you recognize that centering on yourself instead of feeling outwards is certain to make you miserable. Why do you think you fell in love with Nigellus instead of loving him? Why didn't it last? I don't know, I said forlornly. It just happened quite suddenly and for no particular reason. One day I was in love and the next the magic had gone. You were happy when you first went to Rome. You were thinking about Narcissus and me, fighting for us, making plans for our future as well as your own. You were happy when you first worked for Salonius. You were grateful to him and determined that he shouldn't regret his faith in you. The people who came to the temple were important. Their troubles were real. You wanted to help them, not merely for them to be cured so that you could feel more important. Yes, I said, I was happy for the first 2 years, and then you started to make a private world to rule, a narrowing circle with you as the center. Before that happened, Narcissus and I were eager to hear what you had been doing. To us, your work was vital, enormously exciting, and you wanted to share the things we had been doing while you were away. But you never took me about with you. I was so tired of not being wanted. Lucina, you must be honest with yourself. You know perfectly well that Salonius only told you to rest when you got home because you worked too hard. You know, he would have preferred you to see fewer patients. It was you who insisted on having more and more people come to the temple. You know that the story of our little invalid sister was your own invention. It started as a joke and then became a reality because it suited your plans. We tried to take you to parties and chariot races, but you always said they gave you a headache. You were too tired to try with us, too lazy not to be bored. We did what we could to please you. I gave you more and more presents and saw they meant less and less. You ignored Narcissus, and you knew that nothing could have hurt him more. But I was tired. Sometimes I could hardly crawl into bed when I got home. Not too tired to be the priestess. I don't know why, but I always felt well in the temple. Energy seems to come into me, though not enough to use for ordinary things. So loving was too ordinary. Don't you see what you did to yourself? You threw away the power, which was the real source of everything. You could only see through your own eyes, but not through the eyes of the people you loved. And so you were gradually going blind. You were afraid when you knew you would soon be alone in the dark. When you heard Asclepius was dead, you became ill. For you, though he was the only person who could have helped you. While you were ill, you could accept help from ordinary people, me and Narcissus, even from the servants. Then you went back to the temple, more determined than ever to prove that you were self-sufficient. Of course you weren't enough for yourself. Nobody is. So you had to make yourself believe that falling in love with Nigellus would be the cure. But you never really loved Nigellus. He was only the audience you selected to make you feel confident in a new role. The stage is empty. So where is Lucina? I stooped and picked up a handful of earth, crumbling it between my fingers. It felt like earth. It smelled strong and clean as spring furrows after rain. Where is Elysium? Here, where we made it. How can we be anywhere ever except here? But the air is too clear. The flowers never fade. There are no dead leaves under the trees. Nothing is dead here except us. Is that what you're trying to say? He put his arm around me. Do you feel dead? Do I? I could feel the texture of his skin, smooth and warm over the shoulder muscle. See the fine hairs on his arms, his white, slightly irregular teeth. He hugged me and I began to laugh. I never knew that ghosts could be so sordid. So solid, I said. I never knew that dying could be so unimportant that one forgot to notice it. Neither did I until you gave me back the patar. He was laughing so much that he could hardly speak. What a magnificent joke. You who told everyone that ordinary people were immortal and yet never really believed it. And I who was convinced that death was real, both of us dead for years. And surprised because we are alive. We must tell Euripides. It's the funniest thing that ever happened to us. Is Praxiteles dead too? Could we ask him, or would it be rude? I mean, if he doesn't know, he might find it embarrassing. I asked him, when I thanked him for the patar, I wasn't sure about me then, and I was afraid he'd think me insane. He's asleep when he comes here. He says it's refreshing to be young in Elysium now and again. It prevents him being pompous and making scathing criticism of the work of the younger generation. He is still rather young to be patronizing. He can't be 40 yet. As a matter of fact, the banquet you interrupted the night when you called him here was to celebrate his 80th birthday. Don't worry, he said airily. Time in Elysium is different to the kind we used to work by. I don't yet fully understand it myself, but I don't think it's particularly important. We always made our own we always made our own time particularly important. We always made, without realizing it. It was only when we believed in hours and months and seasons that they had any real control over us. It is a little confusing until you get used to it, I said. Are you sure I've been dead for more than 40 years? Only by their time, not by your time. You have been here for years, but it seemed like a few days because you were happy. Time only seems slow when you try to go against the current. I forgot who told me that, but it seems to work. But why did we all come back here? Because we wanted to. Heaven is the place you want to go to, and hell is where you think the gods will send you if they are feeling in a bad temper. So you've caught up with yourself at last. Euripides was laughing at us from a branch above our heads. He jumped down. I still found it reassuring that his heels made a little dent in the moss on which we were lying. Lucina. How delighted I am to hear that I shall no longer have to make conversation adapted to your curious delusions. Lucina, how often did I tell you to use your imagination? And all you did was to make conditions needlessly limited. That rain on the quay, for instance, so cold it made me shiver. Of course, at first I found certain difficulties myself, but then I had an unfavorable start. Please fill in the gaps for me. I know we are all dead, or really alive, or whatever it's called, but I haven't lost my curiosity. Why did I die, and what happened to you and all the rest of us? It's a long and altogether credible story. How fortunate that you will be able to listen without thinking it is time you are hungry, and so making yourself need food. Nor will flies tickle your nose or your legs get cramp. In fact, you will be able to listen with proper attention and without fidgeting. What an audience! Imagine a theatre packed with people and not a cough or a whisper, not a fruit seller or a bored child screaming to be taken out. No, don't, he added urgently, or we shall bring a crowd here and then have to build a theatre for them, and I shall start rehearsing the play. I have suffered great embarrassment deciding to write a play and then making the audience before I had written more than the first few lines. It's so easy to get caught up in your own creation. I want to hear all about that, but not until you've told me about us. How much of our journey is true, and how much were you or I imagining it, and so many questions. All of it was true. Nothing is true to anyone except personal experience. A tree is a tree, whether it was the idea of the god who first made it or the man who planted the seed. Or if it is a dream tree, or a tree you made, or a tree somebody else made, they're all quite real. Everything is someone's idea. It doesn't much matter whose, though some are more solid than others and take longer to change. He'll turn this admirable source of shade into something else if you don't bring him back to the point, said Epicurus. He adores being a conjurer. He turned my favorite vase into a bowl of cheese and forgot how to turn it back again properly. A little loop-sided, perhaps, admitted Euripides. I forgot what the original painting looked like, but you didn't make such a good job of it even when I explained the technique. You forgot to make the other side, so it fell over and broke, just as you believed it would. Never mind the vase. Dear Euripides, please tell me what happened before we left the villa. It will be such an exciting story, and I promise not to interrupt. That will be a change. However, I suppose it would be unfair to ask you to control your curiosity. Curiosity being one of your most charming attributes, though on occasion awkward for your friends. You wouldn't like the tree a little thicker before I start, or more moss. I could easily manage some silk mattresses to lie on, or a Nubian fan-bearer, though my Nubians are not entirely convincing to the critical eye. No tricks, said Epicurus firmly, and I want to hear the story too, which reminds me, I must have been knocked on the head in a back street of Alexandria. I distinctly remember going into a most unsavory quarter. I had heard that a certain merchant had got some rare manuscript. The source was said to be dubious, so the price would not have been too high. The next thing I can recollect was arriving here and being welcomed by Cleon, who said I had better take on my old job of steward. However, more of that later. You tell your story first. This was chapter 6, and the next one is chapter 7, and it is Sunday morning, the 3rd of November.